Morning, everyone. Welcome to day 4 of our Natural Scotland live lessons. Today is Thursday, and it's wonderful to see so many of you back again with us for a 4th morning in a row. If you are just joining us for the first time this week today, that's okay too. Don't worry about that. You don't need to have seen the previous lessons in order to enjoy today. Here's what we've been learning about this week. So Monday was all about animals. Tuesday was about geology. Wednesday was rainforests. And today we're going to learn all about folk stories and how they're such an important part of learning and teaching about the natural world. But first, we're going to have a wee think about what we remember from yesterday. Now, again, don't worry if you weren't here yesterday, that's okay. You might already know the answer. You might be very clever and know the answer anyway. If not, that's okay too. Just take a guess. And if you'd like to watch the lessons previously from today, they're all on our website. All the recordings are there, as well as all the resources that you'll need. So teachers, you should have a link for the resource folder. And if you don't, just give us a shout at ecoschools@keepscotlandbeautiful.org, and we'll be happy to send that to you again. It's also on the website with the recordings. So our first question from yesterday's lesson is, what is lichen? Who remembers what lichen is? What it's made of? And you've got a beautiful picture there of some lichen with all the different colors and textures. It really is a beautiful thing. It's so small, you have to look very close to see it. It's not huge like trees. You look closely on the barks of trees or tree stumps, you can see lichen. Oh, I'm seeing a few answers in here just now. Let's see, what have we got? Few classes are saying it's fungus and algae, a mix of fungus and algae. And that's right. Lichen is 2 or more species living together. Whoopsie. Lichen is 2 or more species living together. And it's usually a type of fungus and a type of algae, or maybe more than one types of those. And it's a partnership, sometimes called a symbiosis. There's a word for you. And the fungus provides a protective home for algae, and in return, the algae provides food for fungus. So they kind of live together like roommates. It's quite a nice thing. Right, so our next question, which you may already have seen, got a sneak peek there. Do you remember that Daniel was saying, if we took a piece of rainforest, if we measured out a piece of rainforest, the size of a football pitch, and counted all the species of lichen that we could find in that area, how many do you think we would find? So 2 hands up if you think it's somewhere around 50, and 1 hand up if you think it's somewhere around 100 species, and a hand on your head if you think it's around 200 different types of species. Excuse me, and there's another beautiful picture of a lichen there, and you can see all the different kinds of species that are living together. There's quite a few in that picture. Quite a few votes for around 200. You're obviously paying very close attention because that is correct. Amazingly, Daniel said there are 200 or more species of lichen in a piece of rainforest the size of a football pitch. And now that's our special Scottish rainforest. So that's pretty amazing. Lichen is a very special thing. Right. One more question for you. Excuse me, how much of Scotland's tree cover is rainforest? So tree cover is land that's covered by trees, right? So how much of that, you think of how much of Scotland is covered by trees, and then how much of that is rainforest, right? So 2 hands up if you think it's somewhere around 2%. And 1 hand up if you think it's somewhere around 10%. And if you think it's around 20%, put your hand on your head. Oh, there's answers coming in already because they're fast. Lots of people saying they think it's somewhere around 2%. Is that everyone thinking that? I don't see anyone guessing anything else. Well, you've all been paying very close attention because it is indeed around 2%. Now, remember, yesterday we learned that this kind of rainforest that Scotland has is only 1% of the Earth's landmass. And if you think that only 2% of our land in our tree cover in Scotland is that kind of rainforest. It's a very special kind of forest indeed. So well done, everyone. You've really been paying close attention. Very clever answers. And now I'm very pleased to introduce our guest for today. Today we have author Allison Galbraith, and she's also a storyteller. And she is with us today to teach us about learning through old folk tales. You can see a couple of her books there. And we'd like to thank the Scottish Book Trust for helping us to have Allison here today. We thank you for your time and for your partnership. Allison, take it away. I'm really excited to hear your story today.
Well, hello, everybody. Thank you, Kat. I was very impressed. So many of you getting the answers right there to what was quite tricky science questions. I mean, not many of us know about lichens, but my topic today is what did our ancestors know and what have they passed on to us through folklore and folk stories? So that's the question. What do we know that's been passed down through our great, 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 great grandparents? Now, that's so many greats, isn't it? We're going back a few hundred years. But let's start with a question to all of you in school and wherever you are today. Our great, 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 we'll stop at 5, great grandparents, did they know more than us about wildlife, plants, animals, the natural environment? Or do we know more today than they did? Were our great, 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 great grandparents nature wise? Did they know more than us? True or false? Have a discussion in class and your teachers can let me know. Do you think they knew more than us? Is it true they knew more than us about birds, plants and animals? Or is it false? Are we smarter today? Let's see. Oh, we have a true, straight in with a true, a yes, you think they're smarter? That's Miss Mackay and Dr. Connor. Oh, your group are split down the middle, Dr. Connor. You think grandparents, great, great, great grandparents, maybe were smarter, maybe not. That's interesting. We have a false. Bargedi think no, our great, great grandparents did not know more about nature. Good answers coming in because true and false, or split down the middle, true, they learned more about it. These are all correct answers. It is true and it is false. Our science has gone on to tell us lots and lots that our great, great, great grandparents didn't know. But I'll ask you another question now. We're going to try and work out the real answer. Do you think your great, 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 great grandparents knew the names of more birds than you know today? You have to think in yourself for that. Do I know the names of the birds that I can see and hear outside the window today? Now, maybe you've got good soundproofing in your school. Can you hear or see any birds out of your windows? Okay, we think we have more microscopes in science, but they had the start of industry. That's interesting. So that's Dr. Connor's class. Also false, as they didn't know as much about protecting it. Ah, that's an interesting from Mrs. Morrison's school. They learned more about nature, but they didn't protect it. This is interesting. These are scientific answers. Such well thought out answers. I agree, Kat. You are really thinking about what's happening to our natural environment. Well, I study the natural environment through its stories, and I look for some of the oldest stories passed down through the generations. I'm particularly interested Some of the schools I know have my book that I wrote with my friend Alette. We collected the folk tales from England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales. And these were stories that were about nature. And some of them were so old, they went back over 1,000 years and they were full of nature wisdom. So I'm thinking about birds today because I want to tell you an old folk tale about birds. Oh, hello, we've got some answers in about what birds can you see outside the window now? Crows, pigeons, seagulls, robins, and we see all of these in our playground. Thank you, Mrs. Garland, and your school there in the playground. Now, honestly, do you know the names of all of these birds? Does everybody in class today know the difference between a pigeon and a robin? True or false? I know the difference between a robin and a pigeon. Let me see. We have swallows nesting. That's lovely to hear. We'll talk about swallows in a minute. Thank you for mentioning them. You have swallows nesting. That's in Dr. Connor's school. And Milne's Primary, yes. Yes, you can tell the difference between a robin and a pigeon. Well done. You are bird wise. And true, Mrs. Kearney says, we do know the difference. Mrs. Morrison, yes. Well, our ancestors didn't have the technology we have today. If they looked in at our classroom lessons this morning, they would think that we were all dealing in wizardry, witchcraft and devilry. How could we talk to each other over screens? How could we use microphones and electricity to be beaming in from my house in Lanarkshire to your house, wherever you live in Scotland? Our technology is so advanced. Our great-great-great-grandparents couldn't have shared knowledge the way we are today. So what they did was tell each other stories. Very few people could write hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and the first books that were produced were written by the only people who'd been to school, and that was monks. Monks and nuns were the first people in our country who learnt to write. And of course, monks and nuns are religious people, and they were writing about the Christian religion. But the very early monks and nuns also wrote about some of the birds around them. They wrote about nature and weather, and they passed all of their learning and their knowledge on to the ordinary people like me and you, who back in our great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents' day couldn't read and write. They passed the knowledge on through stories, through telling each other stories. If you can't read and you can't write, how do you get your information? Somebody tells you, they talk to you. And the best way to remember information is when it comes through a story. Then our brains can remember all the images and the different things that happen, and we get knowledge that way. So now I'm back to you for a question to everybody in class. Can you think of a rhyme or a song? Because rhymes, nursery rhymes, poems, songs, they're a way of telling stories, aren't they? In the song, in the nursery rhyme, is a little tiny story set to a rhythm and sometimes with rhyming words. Are there any old rhyming songs or stories that you can think of that are about birds? That's the question. Answers in the chat. Well, we can think back ourselves to nursery class. When you were learning nursery rhymes, learning to talk, which brought you into primary school, learning to write, took you to secondary school, learning your subjects and what you want to study in the world. Oh, sing a song of sixpence. Mrs. Garland is in quickly. Sing a song of sixpence. Yes, that's a great example, Mrs. Garland. Thank you. Any more nursery rhymes or songs that we remember from our childhood when we were little about birds? let's have a look. Sing a Song of Sixpence is a great one. Here's comes some. Oh, The Ugly Duckling, 5 Little Ducks. Thank you, Dr. Connor. 5 little ducks went swimming one day. That's a lovely one. I didn't remember that one from when I was a little person at school, but since I became a storyteller, if I do go to work with very young children, that's one of my favourite to sing if we're talking about nature and ponds and birds. 5 Little Ducks, The Ugly Duckling. That's a great story. That's a lovely example. That's one that we learn at primary school about a little ugly duckling, and everybody tells him he's so ugly, he's gross, and he grows into a beautiful bird. I wonder if you can remember what beautiful bird that little ugly chick grows into. I shall not tell you. 3 crows sat upon a wall. Not sure how old it is. Neither am I, but it's a fantastic, and it's in Scots, isn't it? It's not Queen's now, I should say King's English. That's 3 crows sat upon a wall. In lovely way to learn the Scots language. Great, that's a lovely one. I love crows. I have a family of crows live here, and I rescued a hatchling 3 years ago. So I've got a little crow comes up to be fed every day. Chicken Licking. Thank you, Mrs. Smith. Chicken Licking. Fabulous story. That's what we called a world folk tale. That story, Chicken Licking, is told all over the world, just as is The Ugly Duckling. This is brilliant. I'll give you a sneak preview. The story I'm going to tell you in a minute is a British story, maybe English, but certainly well known in Scotland too, many centuries ago. Chicken Licking, Peter and Paul. Dr. Connor, thank you. Can you see I don't know if they're in sight for you. This is a very simple children's nursery rhyme that goes back hundreds of years. Do you remember it, everybody? 2 little dicky birds sitting on a wall. One called Peter, one called Paul. Fly away, Peter. Fly away, Paul. Come back, Peter. Come back, Paul. There you are. That one makes me laugh because my sister married a man called Paul, and my first boyfriend was called Peter. But that's for discussion for another day. Okay, everybody, you've done really well. Here's one, though, that I would love you to remember. And I need to know a hands up if you remember or have heard the rhyme about magpies. This is a very old British rhyme, and it's superstition about magpies. Our great-great-grandparents would definitely have been telling us this one. Do you know the one about magpies? Shall I start it off? 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy. Have you heard this one, everybody? Counting rhyme, teaching children to count. 3 for a girl. Well done. That was Mrs. Morrison. Thank you. 4 for a boy. That's lovely. Miss Mackay's got it too. Come on, classes. Do you know the rest of it? 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy. Thank you, Mrs. Mackay. 5 for silver. And there's Mrs. Morrison. 6 for gold. And the last one, everybody. 7 for a secret, never to be told. Well done. I looked into this old verse for you to get the history, and it seems to have been first written down in 1780. How many hundred years ago is that? We are in 2023, so 19, I'm working backwards, 18, 17, over 300 years old. There were superstitions about magpies, and when you met a magpie, you would tip your hat and say, "Good morning, magpie," because 1 for sorrow. Nobody wanted sorrow in their life. Everybody wants to see at least 2 magpies. Why? Why did people in the past want to tip their hats to magpies and make up rhymes about them? Well, as I said, we learnt through stories. You taught your children to count with magpies, but you also wanted to pass on valuable information. You wanted to know, is it summertime? Has the first swallow arrived? And you would say little verses like, 2 swallows don't make a summer. There were lots of lovely little rhymes and words for birds that we don't have now. So, oh, hello, Mrs. Garland is telling us. My daughter still does this. She is always looking for at least 2 magpies. Absolutely. In the past, if people saw 2 magpies all over the country, they would do different things. If you didn't want bad luck, one for sorrow, you could salute them. Hello, magpie. In Northumberland, apparently, they would cross themselves, the sign of the Christian cross. A terrible thing they did in Norfolk. If you saw one magpie, a man would spit over his shoulder 3 times. Don't do that. Spitting is illegal because it spreads germs. Nasty. We don't do that now. I personally, if I see one magpie, I say, "Good morning, Mrs. Magpie. I hope you have a fine day today." And then there will be no bad luck come my way. But the important thing, if we're looking at magpies and counting the number, it means we are observing what is around us. That, I think, is the most important thing about being interested in the creatures, the trees, the plants around us. And it's what our ancestors did know. You watch for the signs in nature and the wildlife, and you have a fair idea of what the weather will be like, or what the growing season will be like for our food. It wasn't just silly superstition. People had to pay attention. Have you heard? No spitting, please, Kat has said. Absolutely. We've all just realised through the dreadful COVID pandemic that in our spit come viruses and germs. That's one of the good things about modern science that maybe our great-great-grandparents didn't know. Great. I'm sure our great-grandparents did. So this is lovely. So what I'd like you to do is count those magpies around your school, and the verse goes on. There are more and more to it. It's not just 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl and 4 for a boy. I'll take you up. 8 for a witch and 9 for a kiss. 10 for a surprise. You should be careful not to miss. 11 for health. 12 for wealth. 13, beware, it's the devil himself. Apparently that rhyme goes all the way up to 20 magpies. Maybe that's something you could look up in school. So birds are important to us. You can think of ways that watching birds might be important in this day and age, and I will get ready to tell you the story. I'm thinking in particular about the importance of birds when you live on the coast. Maybe some of your schools live near the sea, but certainly a sign that there is a great wave coming in, a tsunami, a tidal wave, is when all the seabirds rise up. We're next to the sea, Mrs. Mackay. Okay, so in Troon, I hope there's not going to be any tsunamis in Troon in the near future. But in other parts of the world where there are volcanoes, active volcanoes, and earthquakes, active earthquakes, sometimes great tidal waves come in. And one of the signs is when all of the seabirds take off from the sea, and all the birds and the trees near the beach, and they fly inland. Apparently that's a sign that there's a tsunami coming. So that's very useful to watch our birds. And right next to the sea, Mrs. Morrison, in Irvine. That's lovely. I'm going to Irvine later today. I might see you all. Let's have the story. Pay attention, because I'm going to ask you to learn this story and tell it. But don't worry. I'm going to make it easy for you by using a story stick. Here you are, everybody. Can you see my story stick? I don't know if I can get it in the camera shot in one, but not to worry. We will do it bit by bit, going up the stick, element by element that I've put on the stick to help me remember the story. That's why you'll be able to learn to tell it. Here is a very old story called The Magpie's Nest. Long ago, birds did not make nests. When they were ready to lay their eggs and rear their young, they just laid their eggs anywhere they could. In the grass, on the ground, on the beach, on the branch of a tree, on rocks, on anywhere they could. They would just sit down, lay their eggs, and what would happen to the eggs? The first great wind that blew in, whoosh, would take the eggs away and smash off the branch, they'd fall, or they'd roll off the rock and land below, or some creature would come along like, well, back then, hundreds and thousands of years ago, it would probably have been, oh, maybe a dinosaur would have smashed the eggs on the beach. And so not many chicks survived until one day, one of the cleverest birds that we still have today came flying into the scene. It was a magpie. And there were two of them, Mr. and Mrs. Magpie, and they said, this is useless, laying our eggs and they get smashed and blown over. Let's make a home for them. So the magpies flew all about the woodlands and they picked up sticks, good strong sticks. And can you see? They wove those sticks in a tree into a nice circular strong platform. Oh, said Mrs. Magpie, we can lay our eggs on that. They'll be much safer. And she sat down and one of the sticks in the platform poked up and sharply struck Mrs. Magpie in her bottom. And she went, ah, ah! She said, that's too uncomfortable. But a couple of birds who'd been watching this, the crows, who are also very clever, said, would you look at that? That's what we could go and do, build our nests in a platform. So off they went to the nearest tree and gathered up strong sticks and built them into a platform. Better than the one I've got here. This is just to show an example. They built sides, but strong sticks were how the crows decided to make their nest. Well, the magpies weren't happy with this, so they went down to the riverbank and in their beaks, they scooped up lots of soft mud and they came up and they put the mud on sticks and they said, there, that will be softer. Mrs. Magpie sat down and she went, gloopy mud. She got it all over her feet and all over her beautiful black and white feathers. And she said, no, I don't like this at all. I'm covered in mud. But another bird who was watching, a beautiful song thrush with her speckled feathers, she came down and landed in the mud and she said, I like this. If I just shove my chest into the mud and shape it nicely into a shape that fits my body, oh, she said, I like that. And the mud will dry in the sunshine. So that's what the thrushes did. They built a little nest of sticks, then they put mud into the middle, and Mrs. Thrush rather, shaped the mud inside her nest to fit her perfectly. So that was the thrushes. They flew away and make their nests like that. There was another bird. I've got one of those RSPB birds, this bird. It was you all know, the blackbird. Blackbird watched Magpie carefully and said, that's brilliant, Magpie. I'm going to do what you're doing. And so the blackbird wove a straw and sticky nest, very perfect and small like that, and laid its blue blackbird eggs in it. Thank you so much for the lesson, Mrs. Magpie. And so that's how blackbirds make their nests today, woven out of grasses and straw, very neat and tidy. But magpies weren't finished yet. That was too small for them. So they went off to a pine tree and they got more big sticks and they wove a huge platform around the pine tree. Can you see that one? There's the pine, there's the huge platform, and the magpies sat down and went, is this the nest for us? But the sticks were poking up, the pine needles were sticking in them, and the magpies went, no, this still isn't the perfect nest for us. What are we going to do next? And of course, just then it began to rain. Oh, said Mrs. Magpie, I hate it when it rains heavily. Our chicks would get wet, wouldn't they? Come on, let's weave a cover. Let's put more straw and bits and pieces into this to fill the gaps, and we'll cover it over. Well, a couple of sparrows. Where's the sparrow? You all know sparrows. They're all around the school in your houses. The sparrows were watching and they went, fabulous, let's go do it ourselves. And they flew off and they got lots of little bits of twigs and straw and feathers. And they were so slapdash about it, no care and attention. They just rushed at it and made the scruffiest little nest. It was very small. Oh, their chicks falling out, it's so scruffy. But there were little bits poking out everywhere. It looked unfinished. That's how sparrows make their nest today. Well, there you are. There's my blue. It's raining away. So the magpies start to gather up lots of thin strips of grass, anything they could find, and they wove a perfect ball all the way round with a little hole to get inside. But it was too little for the magpies. Mrs. Magpie said, I can't get inside. She said, it's nice and dry, but how are we going to get in? Two birds who watched this, the long-tailed tits, they swooped down and went, thank you, magpies. We'll use that one. It's perfect for us. They could fit in the tiny entrance, and they collected moss and lichen. They plugged the holes and flew inside. Perfect nest for them. But the magpies weren't happy. They kept picking up little bits they could find. All about, they found bits of material, bits of sheep's wool, feathers, even bits of cardboard, colourful things, pretty things, and they wove it all around their platform into their nest. And finally, Mrs. Magpie sat inside and went, perfect. Oh no, there's little pokey bits still sticking out. She put her beak to her own chest and plucked out some feathers and lined the inside of her nest with feathers. The starlings were watching this and they said, we'll line our nests with feathers. Perfect. Thank you, magpies. And there you are. Finally, the magpies had got their nest where they laid their eggs and had their chicks. The real nest has a beautiful cover. Oh, but did I tell you? There were two birds still watching, the collared doves. And the collared doves said, hoo 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 hoo. And if you can speak back bird language, that means make two nests, Maggie, make two nests, Maggie, make two. The magpies looked at the collared doves and said, no, we've made one nest and we're tired. We're going to have a lovely, long, well-earned rest and lay our eggs here. Make your own nests, collared doves. So the collared doves flew away. Make two nests, Maggie, make two. And to this day, the collared doves make the scrappiest nests you've ever seen. Just a few twigs, barely any effort put into it at all. They were so keen for the magpies to make their nest. No other bird makes a nest as beautiful or as well constructed as the magpie to this very day. And that's the end of the story, The Magpie's Nest. Did you enjoy that story? It's an old story, and I think it's a very easy story for you to learn and tell in school. And there are some instructions and there is the story, but what I'd suggest to make it personal to your school and a bit more scientific, have a look for the birds around the school. Make a list of what birds live near you, and you can look at their nests. We have some nests on a slide, don't we? If we could get our slides up. Is Andrea ready to show you this? Let's have a little bit of a, here we are, there's the magpie. Can you all see that? And there is the covered dome and the entrance for the magpie, very intricately constructed, and inside that will be all the things that the magpies find lying about. So there's our lovely black and white magpies, very clever birds, acrobats. Bye-bye, Mrs. Garland. So let's have a competition. Can you match up the birds to their nests? Here you are. So there is a nest covered. It's a full nest. Which bird is it though? Is that the one the starling makes? A. B, there's a long-tailed tit. Is that the one the long-tailed tit makes with a cover? And oh, lots of lichens and mosses. Or C, is that a wee sparrow or a corn bunting? Who makes that nest? A, starling, B, long-tailed tit, or C, is that a sparrow? Primary P56 of Milnes Primary, think it's C, that you think that's the sparrows. It does look a bit scrappy, but I think the clue to this one is it's covered. The sparrow's little scrappy nest was open to the elements. The chick's fallen out. Ah, B, is the long-tailed milne sparrow. Yep, you've changed it. Balgedi says C. You think that's a really scrappy one? That is actually covered. And the right answer, it's nice and small and cozy, says Mrs. McClements. Well done. And Mrs. Smith and Miss Kenny say B. Long-tailed tit, correct. That's the one I used a little ball for and put the mosses in. That's the correct one. Well done, those who got it right. I understand that it does look tatty, but not as tatty as the real sparrow's nest. Okay, should we do another one? What's the next nest we can show you? Well done, everybody who got that right. Ah, have a look at this. How good are your screens? Can you see what construction is inside that nest? It is straw, but what's lining it under the eggs? Is that A, the thrush's nest? Or is it B, the blackbird's nest? Oh, they are blue eggs, like a blackbird, and it is made of straw. This one's difficult. Or is it C, that's the sparrow again, isn't it? A, song thrush, B, blackbird, or C, sparrow? B, yes, question mark. It is made of straw. It does have blue eggs. This is a trick question. Can you see inside under those eggs is some mud? There is mud, which means the correct answer. Who used the layer of mud over their sticks? It was A, the song thrush. Yes, well done, Miss Milne's Primary. Not Miss Milne's Primary, well done. This is not so easy, is it? Knowing what's inside of nest, we have to really use our eyes. One more. Let's try one more before we finish up today. Well done, everybody. Okay, here is a nest in a tree. It is a strong, big platform of sticks. Is it A, an owl? Is it B, the blackbird? Or is it C, the crow? Who made their nest a strong platform in a pine tree? And they made it bigger than the one in my story, but strong sticks. Who do you think, everybody? We've got some answers. C, C, C. Everybody's got it right this time. C for the crow. Well done, everybody. A strong platform of sticks is the crow. Well done. That's good. I think we're learning that to look at nests, you have to be observant, and we've all learning about this. I think our great-great-great-grandparents possibly did know more about birds' nests than us. I think they would have been paying keen attention to them. Have we got any more? I think we do have another slide to show you. Ah, there's the blackbird's nest. Thank you. Keep Scotland Beautiful have thought of everything for you. There's the blue of the, that's why we were fooled with the one before, aren't we? No mud inside the blackbird's nest, but there's its blue eggs. Well done. Good. Thank you. That's the blackbird. There's the sparrow's nest, everybody. So it's not particularly scruffy, but the edges poke out. That's why this old story is actually teaching us some real truth about how the birds make their nest. There's proper scientific fact. The sparrow's nest doesn't look finished, does it? So there's the wee sparrow. Any more birds' nests for us to have a look at in today's lesson? Ah, there's an owl. Beautiful. And it's in a strong platform like the ones that the magpies rejected in the pine tree. And that is how owls make their nest, isn't it? Up in pine trees. Quite a lot of big birds do that. Really big sticks. And it's a bit scrappy looking too. And there, finally, lovely, is the starling. Now, in this story, it says the starlings make the coziest, comfiest nests with feathers. I can certainly see a bit of moss in that one, but I know that starlings like to make their nests in holes inside trees or buildings, and that there's so few buildings being built today that have places where they can nest that they're making in the open more often. So possibly when they nest inside buildings and the holes in trees, they'll put more feathers in for their eggs. but that one certainly looks comfy enough under those eggs. And I think that is all of our, whoa, no, of course, the last one. There's the collared dove. And what did she sing? Hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo, hoo-hoo. All pigeons and doves make that noise. You'll hear them. Do-do-do-do, and they repeat themselves. So in the story, it's a joke that the doves just say the same thing over and over, make two nests, Maggie. And look at that nest, everybody. That is not much of a nest, is it? It just looks like sticks thrown together. Well, I would love for you in school to have a go at retelling this story. You can either tell it the way it is or straight to looking at your own birds and looking perhaps on the RSPB website and seeing how do they make their nest. And the materials I used for my story stick, I went out into the woods and I collected dried twigs, dried bits of fern. I used pipe cleaners and feathers and oh, I got some plastic eggs left over from Easter, little bits and pieces that were around and craft materials. There's some wool. I would never take lichens from a live tree, and Katrina will tell you that. Only the stuff that's fallen down to the ground that isn't part of a living structure. We do not want to do any damage. Pine cones are great. And your craft materials, things lying around. Maybe you've got Easter chicks left over. I had a whole box of ribbons and bits and pieces. You can use anything you like, just like the magpie bird herself. And I would love to hear you retell the story, especially with the birds that are around your school, specific to where you live, and you can learn about how they construct their nests. That's me, Katrina, and everybody.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
I know there's some schools who are here today who are near the sea, and it would be really interesting to hear a similar story told about seabirds, because they make some fascinating nests, like puffins who have their little burrows. That'll be a really good story. And also, don't forget that, remember Daniel from the Woodland Trust showed us the osprey nest and the osprey webcam. You can have a look at that at some point, because remember their eggs will be hatching quite soon. I think he said it was expected that the eggs would hatch probably next week. They don't know an exact date, but counting how many days the eggs have been in the nest, they think it's probably going to be at some point next week. So, you know, if you're sitting doing some quiet work in class, it might be nice to have the webcam on in the background. I know I have been while I've been doing some desk work. I've got the osprey cam on in the background. It's very calming, and it's just fascinating to see them up close. But I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. Your feedback is always very useful. I know we had a bit of a chat before the lesson with some classes that were here saying that they're getting a lot out of the lessons, and I really appreciate hearing that, because it helps us to make more lessons that you might be interested in. So if there's a topic you want to hear about, if there's something that you'd like us to try making a lesson on, please do let us know. We love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed today's lesson, give us a thumbs up. If you thought it was meh, give us a thumbs sideways. I don't know how to do that on an emoji, but and if it was not really, thumbs down. It's always good to know what you think. And we're running short on time. So if you tell us one thing you've learned today, you could email us or catch us on social media or put it in the chat, something that you learned today that you didn't know before. I love hearing about how all the different birds make their different nests and how they suit their eggs so perfectly. I noticed in the photographs how tiny a sparrow's nest is, which if you think about it makes sense because sparrows are tiny. But did you see that person's thumb in the photograph with the nest? They're just teeny tiny, so their eggs must be tiny as well. It's just amazing how perfect and tiny they are. So what we would like you to do today, following on from the activities that we had before, and again, don't worry, if this is the first lesson you've seen this week, you can always catch up. All the resources are in the resource folder, which teachers should have. If you don't, please give us a shout on our email address, and we'll be happy to send you the link again. But remember, we're making our map of Scotland. So today there are more things for you to add, different things that we've learned throughout the day. So there's something for Monday, something for Tuesday, and something for Wednesday, and something for today in that resource, which you can go and get. And when you can show us your completed map, And if you want us to share that in our assembly tomorrow morning, that would be very cool. So if you have finished your map today, if you take a picture of it and send it to us at our email address or share it on social media and tag us in, we'd be delighted to share different maps that everyone has put together. And also, if you make a story stick, please do show us and Allison as well. I'm sure she'd love to see it.
Yes.
Yeah. And also, if you have any photographs that you want to show us, if you're watching our lessons or any other work that you've been doing this week, we always love to hear from you. Teachers, if you send us a photograph and you don't mind us sharing it in our assembly, please just let us know in the email so that we know it's okay to share it. If it's not, that's okay too. We always love hearing from you. There is our social media handle. I know Allison's was on the previous lesson, but it can be put in the resources as well. So you can give her a shout out and show her your story sticks and we'll share them with you as well. There's our email address as well. If you have any questions about today's lesson or previous lessons, we're going to answer some questions during our assembly. So if you have any questions at all, please email us. But I'm really glad that you've been able to join us today. I hope that we'll see you all tomorrow for our assembly, where we'll be sharing lots of good things with you. But that's bye for now. Thank you, Allison, for your time, as always, and your beautiful stories. I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I really enjoyed your story.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye for now, everyone.